everyone. I'm Rita Kakati Shah, your host for The Uma Show. Welcome to your one-stop journey for feeling empowered. We're a platform for change. We build confidence. We are your voice. We want you to be bold, be you, be Uma. Today, we're exploring empowering women, and I'm so excited to be joined by our goddess of go-getting, Kamalika Bose, who is joining us from Mumbai, and she is an award-winning urban conservationist and the founder of Heritage Synergies in India. Welcome, Kamalika. It's so lovely to see you.
Thank you so much, Rita. I'm really looking forward to our interaction and exchange today.
Absolutely. So start off by walking us through your background. Where were you born? How did you grow up?
So I was born in Calcutta, which is now Kolkata. It's in the eastern part of India. And for the longest time, it's really had its history as being the capital of the British Empire in India. So it was the former capital city till 1911. And I grew up again, in a kind of fairly middle class family. I was a only child, so single kid. So my childhood really was fairly protected, fairly sheltered, where many times I was not encouraged to participate in many kinds of activities only because, my parents kind of felt that I needed to be home at a certain time every day and things. So leading to that sheltered background, but though what Calcutta did is provided us with really good solid education. And then when you end up going to some of the premier schools in the city, you end up having a very different exposure to your social life, your cultural life. So I think Calcutta of the 80s and 90s, growing up, we were also in this cusp, where we were moving, we were kind of that generation that was transitioning from the Doordarshan, that one channel that was available to our parents, to satellite television coming in, and this whole bouquet of all kinds of exposure with globalization in the 90s, opening up the economy in many ways. So, again, from the only drink we had at that point in time was Thumbs Up, and then we suddenly had Pepsi and Coke and everything. So we were like that transition generation who, for many opportunities which were not there for the generation before us, suddenly began opening up. And I think Calcutta at that time was an extremely, extremely cosmopolitan city. So through our social kind of circles and our friends, we met all kinds of people, and that also ends up influencing your worldview, how you grow up, which is not it's not kind of driven into you, but you kind of imbibe it from the place. So I think it was great growing up and being born in Kolkata and that exposure.
I love that. And I love the way you shared it. I mean, you talk about having a bit of that sheltered upbringing feeling. I grew up in the UK, in London, and very, very similar. My parents are from Assam. So there's a very similar sort of background in that upbringing and keeping that tradition and the heritage and your roots as well. So I love how you shared that. So now speaking about your education, you did your master's in historic preservation planning from Cornell University as a Fulbright scholar and were an assistant professor at CEPT University in Ahmedabad. Talk to us about your academic journey and how that led to urban conservation.
Yes. So of course, my shift before I went to Cornell, which was still a slightly later stage in my journey, because I kind of did a master's almost with 5 or 6 years of work experience in hand. And also that had to be the case because to kind of go to an Ivy League school, I really couldn't afford to do that without having a scholarship, and to kind of secure a very good scholarship that was fully funded, I needed to sort of build up a portfolio and a resume which was worthy of that distinction. So I think before, I'll just trace back a little to before I went to Cornell. I spent a significant amount of years studying and doing my undergrad in Ahmedabad at CPT, where I later became an assistant professor. But that was really the seed of, firstly, my parents even allowing me to the befuddlement of many of my relatives, that how can you let your only child go to kind of the other part of the country, to Gujarat, to Ahmedabad and things. So I think on their part also it was a leap of faith, and for me it was really first time being away from home and living on my own, and everything that comes with that. So and it's only actually after I went to Ahmedabad that I really started understanding that there is something called the old city. because living in and growing up in Calcutta, of course, we kind of end up forming certain comfort zones that we don't step out of,
Yeah.
and we only engage with certain parts of the city that are comfortable for you. So there are several parts of Calcutta that I never stepped into. It was like a different world. But when I went to Ahmedabad for the first time, I was exposed to cities like Jaipur, like Jaisalmer, like Banaras, like Ahmedabad's own walled city itself, which is now World Heritage Site. And I realized in these conversations about traditional cities, about our medieval history and heritage, I really had nothing to contribute to in those conversations, because for me, I came from a city of colonial origin,
Right.
and it's such a recent past, and it's such a recent history that I didn't know how to meaningfully contribute to those conversations on where I came from. And I think that really sowed a seed for me to then even in my final year in Sept, where we do a research thesis, I kind of came back to Calcutta to investigate that is there really an old city in Calcutta? Is there really a native indigenous town? Is the town entirely made by British, or did the Bengalis also contribute? So I think those were the first seeds. And then during the research, I realized that I was kind of walking around different streets and alleys and different neighborhoods of North Calcutta, which is the indigenously developed city. And I realized that while I'm trying to historically study these houses and these mansions, every day I see one being pulled down.
Mm.
And so in time, as I kind of finished my course, the
Right.
questions in my mind started developing. Of course,
Mm.
I wasn't very sure whether this is just a passing phase, whether this is just an interest that I have, which will probably dissipate and diffuse in a couple of years, which is why I did not immediately after my undergrad education apply for a master's, because I wanted to be sure that heritage and conservation is something that I'm truly interested in. And therefore, the journey and the move to Cornell happened after 4 or 5 years of having worked in different capacities, both in academics and I think teaching, getting the opportunity to teach at CEPT in the very early and formative years of my career really brought that academic rigor to the work that I did, because everything that you did was rooted and grounded in very solid questions and inquiries.
Mm.
And which is why then it became very clear that I want to do a master's in heritage. Again, urban conservation was something that an interest that came slightly later, because initially I was interested in architectural conservation, in
Mm.
specific landmark buildings in a
Right.
city. But as I was doing projects in those 4 or 5 years, I realized that just saving landmarks while the rest of the city kind of disappears or is demolished, or you have high rises coming up, pretty much what you have in Manhattan as well. The fight to save specific uh, historic districts and zones,
Yeah.
that began appealing to me a lot more than saving an iconic landmark monument.
Mm. Wow, I
And
love
then,
that. That's meaningful work. Yeah.
and I think once that clarity came to my mind, I think it was very clear that it was a historic preservation planning degree that I was looking for. And it was great that the timing was right, and in a way that the scholarship came through and things kind of aligned in a way.
No, amazing. Really well said. And you're right. Sometimes by just planting the seeds and feeling that the heritage, that natural bond that you have, and that's what cements your future career path. And that actually led for you to an extensive international experience, all the way from New York to France, as examples. Talk to us a little bit about that, and how that led ultimately to your Mumbai-based consultancy, Heritage Synergies India.
Yeah. So this is also very interesting, Rita, because again, I didn't have a passport till about 15 years back, because, life was panning out in a way that I didn't see myself, going abroad, or there were no opportunities. I didn't have the personal funds to go on
Mm.
foreign holidays, etc. So So this whole opportunity, I think the Fulbright and the scholarship really opened up many windows of opportunity and exposure. And also I'm thankful for in that to a lot of my former professors and mentors who have really guided me abundantly with their time and opinion and knowledge and wisdom. So once that happened, it really opened the floodgates to even your desire to know. It's almost like a ripple. The more you see, the more you know, the more you want to do. It's self-perpetuating in that sense, and if and at some point, then when you don't settle, you want to get more. You want to push the envelope further and further. So I think each of these different scholarships and fellowships that I've periodically secured post the Fulbright has, to my mind, it's really opened the windows of my mind. And initially, that was just my engagement in the US, understanding how preservation policies, regulations, incentives work in the planning context of India. Of course, then later, several opportunities opened up for me to have a similar training and exposure in Europe. And for me, all of these just become crucibles to absorb, and then because I live and work in India, the final output is really to funnel each of these varied exposures and learnings to how I make an impact back home on the ground realities that I'm working in the communities that I work with, in the situations which are very different. So which is also for me a learning that you can't, no matter where your exposure is from, you can't just transplant that in your own. There are contextual and cultural dissimilarities, legal and regulatory
A lot.
differences. Yes.
Yeah.
So which is why then I set up also Heritage Synergies, just to kind of close that bit, only about 4 years back. Because till then I wanted to have a solid experience and body of work which is sort of diverse, working with different groups of people, different stakeholders, so that when I launch something on my own, I'm on a lot more sure ground as to what I really want to do.
Amazing, and really well said, because you've turned your passion into something very, very meaningful as well. And speaking of something and your passion and something very meaningful, you're also involved with various scientific committees and non-profits in Mumbai. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yes. So I think that is one side of my work and my my passion that comes from having an early exposure to teaching in a university. So I don't wish to, now that I am in practice, dilute the rigor and the level of research and interrogation that my work has, whether it is working on a project or writing a book or devising a workshop, whatever be the mode of engagement. It's important for me to have that bridge with academia and with research, which is why, though I don't teach in a university anymore full time, my engagement with these kind of scientific and technical committees, with nonprofits, all of that become new kind of segues that helps me bridge this gap between academia and practice, both of which I want to solidify through Heritage Synergies.
That's a really, really great point. Now, what kind of nonprofits are you actually working with?
So mostly they end up being community groups and organizations. So pretty much like in New York, you have different neighborhood organizations, neighborhood preservation groups. So some of these are registered, some of them are voluntary groups. So they're really ground up organizations. These are not large foundations and trusts which have a lot of money and endowment. Most of them, they've been formed by citizen groups for advocacy and awareness. And as a professional, as an expert, I kind of handhold and collaborate with them to devise conservation strategies, roadmaps, etc.
Wonderful. And because you're helping them from a grassroots level up, which is very, very great work. So now talk to us about some of your projects that you've worked on, including the London exhibition that you co-curated, Bengal's Durga.
Yes. So I'll start with that since you mentioned this. So Durga Puja, as you know, is the most pivotal cultural festival and cultural heritage of Bengal, which is really celebrated. It has a canvas and a scale which has really transcended the neighborhood puja or the neighborhood festival it first started out as at a public scale. Before that, it was completely a private, by the elite in Calcutta would patronize the festival. So now, in the last 20 years, I would say, with a lot of funding, etc., there's a lot of international spotlight and awareness, and it's really transcended from a religious festival to an arts and crafts extravaganza. So this was an initiative that the West Bengal government and the tourism department wanted to highlight to the rest of the world and use it as a conduit to bring in international tourism. So because so as part of the Totally Thames festival, which is an annual riverside festival in London, there was this very interesting collaboration where the government collaborated with the British Council and my co-curator Ali Pretty, who runs a firm in London. We kind of co-created this to not really talk about the religious aspects of the festival because that's there, but really present to an international audience a very modern and contemporary perspective of the festival.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done outdoors. So it was not done in a gallery. So it's almost like when you're walking on South Bank, you just encounter something like this. So it really also broke the notion of an exhibition in a gallery by just being an exhibition on a promenade or a park. So,
wonderful. More like an actual experience, a cultural experience that people could actually feel. What does it mean? What is Durga Puja? What are those feelings that you imbibe when you are in Kolkata or in Assam, celebrating these holidays? What does it mean to you? And you feel that even like on the South Bank. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're clearly so very accomplished, and you've actually authored 5 books, and you've been featured in Forbes India, The Telegraph, Press Trust of India, The Hindu, amongst others. What's next on the horizon for you?
So none of this is really planned. So I don't know what's next on the horizon, but I think that fundamentally, whatever my mode of engagement, whether it's writing a book or whether it's writing an opinion piece in a newspaper or an interview for a mainstream magazine, the intention and the objective really is to reach the common person, reach the masses. Because otherwise, our profession and discipline is such, it's very easy to make it, only scientific or only technical or only professional and esoteric. But heritage is a subject that we will not be able, the common person on the street needs to feel and care and identify with heritage. It just can't be rarefied space of professionals and experts talking about it. So I feel as long as I'm able to create multiple opportunities and windows to reach people and demystify what is heritage conservation for them. What does it mean to value your heritage? What does it mean to inherit something which is in a country like India, which has so many complicated histories and pasts?
Absolutely. And you said something really, really specific there. It's your heritage. It's almost like your identity. And it's about people bonding and understanding their roots and where they come from. So that's really incredible stuff that you just shared. It's often said that behind every strong woman is a passion that drives her. What is that passion, that driving force for you?
So I would really say it's something very simple as, I think Steve Jobs has said it beautifully: stay hungry, stay foolish. Like I never want to reach that place where I feel like, okay, now I know it all, or now I feel privileged or entitled because I've achieved a certain amount. So I'm always trying to push the envelope, trying to take the difficult path, try to set challenges up for myself so that I never kind of get into that comfort zone. So in a way, I mean, being self-motivated and self-driven helps, but also it's challenging, especially if you work in an independent space. If you're an independent consultant, every morning, there's no way you can just take the day off and feel like, okay, now I'm not going to do anything. So a lot of it also depends on self drive. But I think because I work in heritage, and heritage is something, it's an endless inheritance that we have, right? And even if through my work I'm able to contribute to a small fraction of that, make a slight amount of impact, and in the field, I think that's what really motivates me to explore all these various mediums. So the medium for me is not as important as the end goal, which is then making a difference.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. And Yoshua also talks about having challenges along the way. Can you talk to us about a challenge that you faced, something that defined you perhaps, and what did you do about it?
Yeah. No, this is, I think there are small and large challenges which come across, but I think for me, a very, very crucial juncture in life was about a decade back, where the choice was really about, am I going to come back and work in India and be here long term? And though that was my objective, but life keeps throwing curveballs at you. And there was a time when, this is about 10 years back, when not too many people in my inner orbit were really happy with my decision to come back to India, work here, when there were other opportunities to live and work abroad and maybe settle down over there. So I think for me, that decision, sticking on to that decision, that no, I mean, the fact that I want to secure a foreign degree and all of this international exposure is not because I want to settle down there, but because I want to contribute back in my country. And you constantly have these things of, but what is there in India? And India is such a third world country and all of that. So you have to keep fighting the systems, and that system sometimes means you're absolutely in a circle of people. And I think that was a very difficult phase, because every decision that I took, whether it was personal or professional, was constantly being scrutinized and criticized. And it was like waging a war against your own people.
Right.
And then you have to kind of walk on coals, and some of your relationships irreversibly altered, and they can't be mended again. And through all of that, if you survive, then you kind of go on.
I think that's part of the job of actually being an entrepreneur. You've described it so well. It's almost like it's an ongoing battle sometimes, but you are thinking of the greater good and your passion that's driving you to keep going forth and going there. So thank you for sharing that really meaningful example. So true. And what do you do to relax?
So again, like I say, some people think like I'm a complete workaholic and I don't relax, but that's not true. But I try to sort of weave in some relaxation within the work that I do. Like, for example, my work entails a lot of travel within India itself. And the pre-pandemic, I was pretty much, living out of suitcases. But then what I do is I like to explore new places and new cultures, etc. So even if I go on a work trip, I try to extend it by a day or two,
Right.
just to, take out some personal time in that city and, know and perceive it differently. So travel becomes an interest, one of the ways in which I also relax. But otherwise, I mean, it's just like normal people. I have a good circle of friends in Bombay that we meet up, we hang out, and they also kind of have my back, and they act as the other world, where I don't constantly need to be with professionals and doing shop talk all the time. So that's very important. And I think lockdown has also helped me gain greater confidence in my cooking skills. So now on weekends, etc., I don't look at it as a chore, but kind of do it lovingly.
Oh, I love that. Really, really well said. Part of what you've expressed is something I really feel strongly about too, just traveling. I cannot wait to be able to get on another airplane and take some of that me time too, add on that extra, even hour to a trip, to actually spend that time to absorb and look in your surrounding. So really, really well said. Before we let you go, what advice would you give to any young girls or women who are trying to follow in your footsteps maybe one day?
So I would say that I think women, especially because there's so many pressures on them after a certain point in time in life, they need to understand for themselves whether they just want to have a job and do a job, or do they want to really build a career, because there are two completely different things. And many times we kind of interchange one for the other, and we look at a working woman as a working woman need not necessarily be career oriented, because the moment you become career oriented, there are
Yeah.
many other complex issues of growth, of sacrifice, of the trials and tribulations. Whereas if you're just happy being in a job, and the fixed sort of frameworks that come with it, that's a different calling. So I think it's important for us to recognize that what is it that we want to do, and it's not enough to just be working women, because today many women are working women. But when do you then push and make that leap of faith? And if at all you want to build a career, then you need to aggressively and single-mindedly work in that direction, where without kind of relentlessly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey with us today, Komalika. Komalika Bose, founder of Heritage Synergies India. And thank you to our viewers for joining us on this empowerment journey today. We want you all to embrace that inner goddess of go-getting. We want you to be bold, be you, be Uma.